This is a work session, just for everyone's information, so we'll not be taking a vote tonight. And we'll hear from Eric Cattell tonight, and he'll be briefing on notice of potential noise impacts resulting from training activities on Fort Riley and recommended noise attenuation briefing methods. And this was part of the JLUIS activity that's been going on now for probably about a year. So, Eric.
Good evening. As stated, I'm going to provide an overview of the process that Riley County will be implementing to provide this notice of potential noise impact, and it's resulting from training activities on Fort Riley, and it's notice to certain portions of Riley County that I'll explain here in a little bit. The whole reason behind this was the update to the joint land use study that was done in 2017, and this was basically done through the Flint Hills Regional Council and a grant from OEA to the Flint Hills Regional Council, and it was an update of the 2005 JLUIS study. And it involved the council and the cities surrounding Fort Riley and JLUIS process. Just as a reminder, it's not actually driven by Fort Riley. Fort Riley is one of the parties involved, but it's really driven by the surrounding communities and counties through the OEA grant. And so the JLUIS process, just as it did in 2005, it identifies a range of management strategies to reduce potential urban encroachment around the fort, which, similar to urban encroachment around an airport, can adversely affect the training activities on Fort Riley. But it also recognizes the needs of cities and counties to grow and for property owners to be able to use their property. And so it prioritizes a number of different action steps that can be taken, and it assigns specific action steps to cities, counties, or Fort Riley, depending on what it is. The City of Manhattan adopted this updated JLUIS study in 2017 as part of the comprehensive plan. One of the recommendations of the JLUIS study was to perform an acoustic study of the noise environment in and around Fort Riley. And so, again, the Flint Hills Regional Council hired Henderson engineers to do that acoustical study. It was performed from the fall of 2018 through this spring. They deployed a number of noise monitors over multiple days in various locations, both on posts and around the outside of the post, and it was to monitor real time during the more active training activities for Riley, and that often involved large caliber weaponry, which is the weapons that you really hear and feel. It's the low frequency sound wave going through the atmosphere that you're hearing and feeling. It is not a shock wave going through the ground. It's that pressure wave traveling through the atmosphere, and so it's very dependent on weather conditions as to how much you feel it and hear it and how far it propagates off of Fort Riley. And because that's a unique kind of sound wave, unlike airport sound, which is more of a drone and airport noise, and most noise within an urban environment is what's called A-weighted noise, whereas this noise from very low frequency weaponry is a concussion weighted day-night average, and that's what they use as part of this noise modeling, and it's modeled over or averaged over a 24-hour period. And they actually add decibels within the noise model. They add 10 decibels during the late night, early morning hours, sort of as demerits, because that noise during those time periods is more annoying to the public, and so the model builds that into it. The data from all this noise modeling and the acoustical study was then used by the consultant to develop the noise construction guidelines to attenuate noise impacts, and that's the report that's dated June of this year. This map just shows where the noise meters were placed. Those red boxes are the various locations. This is Manhattan right here. Fort Riley Military Reservation is this black outline here. So some of the monitors were on post. This is Junction City down here. So it labels the monitors and the times that they were actually deployed. This is just one of the outputs of the model, and this is over a 4-day period from December 3rd to December 7th. And the C-weighted, which again is the low frequency noise, is the blue lines, and the A-weighted noise, which is more the mid-range frequencies that's been filtered out for low and high frequencies, the red. And this is just showing the different noise events, essentially, the different impacts that you hear or feel. And again, it's the blue ones that are really the ones that, it's more like thunder, a thunderstorm that can actually rattle your windows or your house. So as again, a result of the noise study that was done, the consultant created 2 levels of noise attenuation construction standards. And I think this is one of the first ones in the country. Most of the noise construction standards that were developed, and the ones that the consultant provided in 2005 with the original JLUs, are related more to airport noise. And this isn't airport noise that we're dealing with. It's that percussion wave traveling through the atmosphere. So they created 2 levels of attenuation, level A and a level B. Level B is a higher level of attenuation. And they identified that for buildings in the land use planning zone, you should consider using level A. And if you're in noise zone 2, you should consider using level B. And just to show you where that is on a map, again, this is the city of Manhattan. The land use planning zone, or LUPZ, is this furthest out, the lighter blue noise contour, and it equates to about a 57 to 62 decibel C-weighted noise. And again, so the construction guidelines are suggesting if you have a house or a building within the LUPZ, you should consider using the level A noise attenuation guidelines. If you're within noise zone 2, which is kind of the next darker shade of blue, and there are some portions off post, city of Riley is in noise zone 2, Keats in this area is in noise zone 2. So if you're doing construction in those areas, it's suggesting you might want to consider that level B sound attenuation, which provides a higher level of mitigation. So the construction standards also get into other recommendations concerning site selection. Obviously, the further you are from the noise source, or for Riley, the better. So if you have a large site, they're recommending you locate the building further away. Also, building orientation is important. You don't want to have the exterior flat walls of a house perpendicular to the direction of the noise, or where the sound is coming from for Riley. And particularly if you have like an L-shaped building, you don't want that open part of the L facing the sound source, because it will just focus the sound right into the building. And so there's recommendations within the guidelines that the consultant put together on siting, building orientation, also interior space planning. You don't put the bedrooms on the west side of the house, you put them on the east side of the house, because that's, in Manhattan, the sound is coming from the west, from Fort Riley. It also gets into talking about noise barriers and different ways you can create noise barriers, and these are physical structures not in the building, they're outside of the building, but between the noise source and the building. Along highways you see sound walls, but again, with this noise study was dealing a little bit more with the C-weighted noise, and those very low frequency noises they found tend to just go over topography and through forested areas and things. And just like thunder from a thunderstorm is very difficult to fully attenuate that C-weighted noise. There are other issues that they call sound flanking in construction of buildings. There are always gaps and openings for venting and that type of thing, and it talks about sealing all of those with acoustical types of seals. Same thing with HVA systems and ventilation in buildings, that there's special treatments that can be done to reduce sound penetration coming through those systems and into the interior of the house or the building. And then the guidelines get into different wall, roof, window, and door units and different ratings for those, again, depending on if you're in level A or level B and what construction standard you're trying to build to. I should mention that these guidelines were reviewed by our Risk Reduction Code Services division of the Manhattan Fire Department, and they found no particular issue or problems or concerns with those. I've kind of explained the map already. Again, that the two noise areas that are related to level A and level B. One of the other recommendations of the JLU study, and that's really what we're here to talk about tonight, not so much the noise study, is creating a uniform noise disclosure process. And the consultant for the JLU's project, which was Santec, was recommending that this be done more at the county level. And that's why for Riley County, it's the Riley County Deed Office that would be implementing this process. And this process was developed between the Riley County Planning and Development and the City Community Development Department, and speaking with Riley County Deed Office and some of the title companies in the area on how best can we create a noise disclosure process that is just automatic and doesn't rely on realtors or sellers to implement. And so the idea is that the Riley County Register of Deeds will file this notice on all the properties within the identified noise disclosure area, and I'll show you a map of that here in a minute. And so that way, whether it's platted property or unplatted property or is re-subdivided in the future, it will be on that deed. So whenever somebody is doing a title search or doing property transactions, it will appear automatically through that title search. And again, it doesn't rely on the realtor or the seller to provide that notice, but it provides a broad notice to the public, whether it's a realtor or a buyer or a builder. It provides them that notice of potential noise impact, and it tells them where they can find this information, both a map on where is the property they're looking at located, which noise area is it within, and where can they find these voluntary guidelines. And it's up to the builder or the home buyer if they want to implement these construction guidelines or not. They're completely voluntary. This is just a recommended process that people consider using those. And again, level A is kind of the good level, level B is better, and depending on where a structure may be located and how noise sensitive the land use is, is it a church, is it a hospital, is it a private residence, they should consider utilizing these construction standards. Also, I should note that our Unified Development Ordinance requires that on preliminary and final plats, as well as all building permits that are located within the LUPZ, which is this lighter area, that we put a note on the preliminary or final plat or on the building permit is being issued. And we've been doing that since 2015, ever since the memorandum of understanding was signed with Fort Riley, and that will be codified in the new Unified Development Ordinance as well. So just a little bit of explanation on the land use planning zone, which is again that furthest out noise contour associated with Fort Riley. In 2005, when the first joint land use study was done, this is where that computer modeled line was. It was west of the city of Manhattan. In 2011, Fort Riley, through better noise modeling and changes in their training regime, redid their noise analysis and noise studies and published this revised map that moved the line a little bit further east into some existing neighborhoods in Manhattan. Then in 2015, and this was just about a month before we were going to adopt our comprehensive plan update, they released another update of the LEPZ and the noise studies, and it moved it even further east. And so my point is, over a 15-year period, the LUPZ, which is a computer modeled as well as noise monitored line, moved about a mile east over 15 years. And so as Raleigh County and the city were trying to determine, okay, what is the boundary that we should use for this notice of noise disclosure, we thought it would be important to provide a little bit of a buffer, not just use the existing LUPZ line. Number one, noise just doesn't stop at that computer modeled line. Is very weather dependent, as I indicated, depending on air temperature, wind speed, wind direction, relative humidity. And so noise just doesn't stop here. These are a modeled line saying generally over a 1-year period west of this red line within the LUPZ, you can expect noise peaks of between 52 and 60 C-weighted decibels. So again, the idea was that recognizing that sound doesn't just stop at that line, and that this line could continue to move at the discretion of Fort Riley, that the boundary should be a little bit further east. And so this kind of dashed purple line is for Riley County, the area that was identified for the noise disclosure. And just to zoom in here a little bit, the yellow hatched area is the existing city limits. This is the LUPZ line, the existing one, and this noise disclosure boundary is about a mile east of that. So again, the process would be Riley County Deed Office would file on all the properties within Riley County and within that dashed line this notice.
So Eric,
Yes.
just a second. So since you said the line has been moving over the past 5 years,
Over the past 15 years.
15
since
years.
2005.
That's what I thought, yeah. You mentioned several reasons why, but is it also that the training has been itself more rigorous, or they're using different types of different
Yes, to
training,
all
or
of
is it
that.
just all the things you just mentioned?
Better noise modeling. They added, this is the MPRC up here, the multipurpose range. They added a second multipurpose range after 2005 up here. This is where the tanks in the Bradley is live fire towards the southeast. This area is the impact area for the larger artillery, and they're all around the outside and fire into the middle of that.
So they added a few more.
So they added, the training has changed. They've added different weaponry. Some of it's louder, some of it is less loud. They've also changed some of their training regimes where certain training activities, they have aircraft coming in through specified aircraft corridors, primarily to the north, and then coming down over the training areas. So they're doing joint training with weaponry on the ground as well as aircraft. And so all that has changed the noise models over time.
Right. So it's
that-
not just the
It's
all the
not.
natural consequences of it, but it's also the way their training has changed and
Correct.
the ranges that,
And better modeling, computer
Better modeling,
too. And
yes.
so that's why, again, in 15 years, it's moved about a mile to the east. And so this is the notice, and I know you can't really read it here very well, but basically the highlighted sections, it's basically telling property owners and prospective buyers that the property you're looking at could be within one of these three identified noise contour areas. It tells people that they can go to the Riley County website, which I can show you here in a minute, to see where the property is. And then it describes the three noise areas and the decibels that you can expect. Then at this point it says, when undertaking new construction or additions or remodeling to existing structures located within these boundaries, noise attenuation building methods are recommended to be followed. They're not required, they're recommended, they're suggested to be followed. And this is the title of the actual study. And so the Riley County website that I can show you here in a minute has a link to that study, and we'll put it on the city website as well. So that's the actual notice. And then there's about 3 pages of legal description that describe this boundary. I also want to mention again with the Unified Development Ordinance, this is the notice that we've currently, up to the last sentence, not including this last sentence, this is the wording of the notice that we put on preliminary and final plats that are located in that land use planning zone. And a very similar note is what Code Services has been putting on building permits since 2015, if the building is located in the land use planning zone, to put people at notice. And so these are other ways of providing notice. Of course, most people buying a house don't look at the plat, and they'll never see the notice. They don't see the building permit, and they don't read the building permit. The builder might, but they don't, and that's why the JLU's study was recommending that counties do this broader notice, and why this whole process was determined to have the deed office just file that notice on the property, so it's there. So kind of the steps we've taken on August 15th at the joint city-county meeting, Raleigh County presented this same process to those that were in attendance. We had a work session with the planning board on the 16th. Tonight we're doing the work session. We're anticipating that on November 5th, we would have an action item for you to authorize the mayor to sign this notice. And then times to be determined. Riley County is still in the process of working with the cities of Ogden and the city of Riley, giving them the similar presentation and talking about having them sign the notice. And then once all the three cities have done that, then the Riley County Register of Deeds will actually implement the process and file the notice. I can answer any questions now if you have them. I can also show you the website if you'd like to see it.
What is so if this process gets approved and we move forward with these notices, do the homeowners that currently live there, will they receive some kind of like letter or notice saying this piece of paper got added to your deed? Might be something I could, if I was a homeowner in that area and I went to go sell my home, it might provide a little bit of a hiccup if I found out during the sales process this document was added about noise.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I'll have to find out from the deed office how are they going to notify people of that they're putting this notice on their deed. But I guess the second part of that question is it will appear through the title search, through a land transfer. It's going to appear obviously, but your question more is all the existing landowners out there that are within that boundary, are they going to be told that this notice is going to be filed on their property? And we'll need to find that out from the deed office, how they'll give notice of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we're doing this. I think we've come a long way since I've been on the city commission, where there weren't any notices at all, to where there's more communication and we're getting more updates about the time frames they're going to be training, and that helps the community be aware of it, because sometimes it is louder than anticipated. So I'm thankful for that, as well as the study itself. Are other installations doing something similar then? Or are we following others? Or are we kind of piloting this?
Most installations do JLU studies because, again, just like airport, if they're a training base, whether it's Air Force, with aircraft, or a military base like Fort Riley with training, that urban encroachment can cause issues that ultimately could cause them to shut down the base.
Right.
And so, yes, it's being done nationally, but I think this particular kind of noise study is pretty unique to Fort Riley, in that through Flint Hills Regional Council, that acoustic engineer was hired to specifically study the C-weighted noise, which is that low-frequency noise coming from the large caliber weaponry. Again, in 2005, all the construction guidelines that we were given by the consultants dealt with airport noise, and airport noise is A-weighted noise, not C-weighted noise. So and Gary Stiff is here from Flint Hills Regional Council, I haven't heard of any other forts that have actually used this C-weighted. I mean, they measured noise with C-weighted noise, but they haven't necessarily had a consultant write construction guidelines for the public to follow, using, recognizing the uniqueness of C-weighted noise.
Yeah, I do think it's unique to us, and also not just the noise itself, but the vibrations that go with it in those areas. So it's a little different than the air noise that might be happening. And we want Fort Riley to continue training and practicing. We are very good partners with Fort Riley, and I think this gives a good communication piece to the residents in those areas. At the same time, these are not mandated, like you said, this is, we're recommending that developers follow the guidelines that were provided, but it will be on the deed. Does that impact the property valuations or developers when we're selling the regions for development in those areas?
Well, I guess that's, excuse me, that's yet to be determined, but I would be surprised if it would. Currently, properties are buying and selling.
That's a growing
without the
area.
I mean, when people move to Manhattan and they hear the noise, they go, "What is that thunder? What is that?" And then you get used to it and you ignore it pretty much. And I really can't see that this would adversely affect property values.
Right. Well, I was only wondering because now it is part of a deed,
Right.
because now it's in writing, even though we know what happens
It's
on a
it's giving people notice that they could be exposed to noise that they're probably already hearing, but what's important about this is it's telling them where they can find guidelines on how to mitigate the noise if they so choose. They don't have to,
Right.
but they can if they want to.
And we don't currently do this for flooding areas, right?
Well,
It's a different
well, we
topic,
don't
I
have
understand
noise
that.
so much with
Yeah.
flooding, but at airport, I could pull up the city website. The city website, we have a noise page that deals both with our airport noise and Fort Riley noise. So yes, we do give information on both.
Right, now I was talking about totally different thing about flooding. I wish there was something on a deed that says you're in a flood-prone area or something
Oh,
of that
yeah.
sort, but that's totally different. But no, I think this is good, I'm glad that Gary was part of this. Gary, I know you've retired from the Flint Hills Regional Council. Are you still part of the Manhattan Planning Board as some of these come into implementation phases? You are part of that still? Okay, good. Yeah, other than that, I think as long as Riley County is on board with it as well, it seems like that's where it needs to be. And it's growing more into Manhattan than it was in the past, so we'll see what
Let me
happens.
take a quick minute and just show you this is the Raleigh County GIS site. You can go and turn on the aerial photo. You go to layers, down to Fort Riley, click on the very first box, and it shows you the noise area. The light blue is the LUPZ, the yellow is the zone 2. You can zoom in as far as you want to zoom in. We have this on our website as well, and you can see really which property is it covering. So you can tell where is a property, which noise zone is a property within, and then you can click on this. It's hard to see here, but there's a little question mark. Click on that, and it explains what CD&L noise is, blast noise. It explains the 3 zones. And then right here is the link to the construction guidelines. So the public and contractors can see all the guidelines for the level A and level B. The noise disclosure that Riley County will file on deeds will have this link to it, but we'll also have all this information on the city website as well.
That's pretty cool that you can see it. Thank you, Eric.
Just reaction-wise, I too am pleased to see that this is coming forward to be just formalized, even though they're guidelines. They've been several years in the making, and through the Flint Hills Regional Council. On the map, I see the yellow hash marks there, and they're east of the red and white line. What is that? Because of the red and white line is the boundary.
That's the noise disclosure boundary.
Yeah.
That
And
Riley
then
County will use.
the hash mark continues on to the east.
Yeah, that's just showing you the current city limits
Oh,
of
just,
Manhattan.
that's just city limits.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is Manhattan,
All right,
and then the airport in Ogden. It's showing you incorporated areas.
Okay, good. So, I think the line goes right through your house.
Yeah, and again, noise doesn't just
Yeah.
stop at a
Right.
computer model
No, I
line.
just was thinking.
It's sort, and you brought up floodplains. It's at the planning board, they asked, well, why do we have a 1-mile buffer? It's similar to our future condition flood model. That is based on, it's looking out at the future. What is the flood impact going to be when Manhattan builds out following the comprehensive plan? This is a similar idea that we don't just use the existing noise contour because we know it's probably going to move. So let's provide a little bit of buffer so that there's a little bit more flexibility.
And I certainly don't want to mess up what we're discussing at the same time, because flooding has a devastating impact as far as displacement of families and such. This doesn't. This is more of an informative piece, because we want to have the training continue with Fort Riley, but we just want community members to be aware of where they are located, and businesses and residential properties, and just in general. So this is more of an informative piece. Certainly, I think this is creates a better partnership between the two entities.
I just think that this notice is important. We all have had phone calls or emails from folks who live out on the extreme west side of town about how the noise has occasionally interrupted their lives. And so I think this notification is terribly important, so that people have a heads up as they are considering prospective purchases of homes.
Let's see if we've got public comment. So I didn't know, Gary, if you wanted to say anything about this, or Brad, anything? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just come on up and give us your name and your address. We'd love to hear from you.
My name is Lynn Thomas. I lived at 14821 Madison Road for 33 years, which is on the boundary of Fort Riley. And I have basically two comments. The first is I'd like to point out something in your tonight's agenda that Eric did not. On page 5 of 17, it has this one sentence that I'd like to call to your attention. In fact, the low frequency pressure waves generated during Fort Riley activities will continue to be heard or felt, and no amount of noise control measures will provide an appreciable benefit in attenuation. No amount of noise control measures will provide an appreciable benefit in attenuation. So we've got pages of A and B, but the bottom line is they're not going to help in the low frequency noise. And the second point I'd like to make is that the Army funded, I guess, most of the 250 some page 2017 revised report, and in it there's a lot of information about things like things that could reduce the noise levels, such as practice rounds versus full power rounds, whatever they're called, and things like the effect that atmospheric conditions have on the noise level. And of course, the Army has chosen in their final recommendations to ignore all those things. The Army wants no responsibility to be a partner in reducing the noise. They just want open season and the ability to do whatever they want, and have you put this in the deed. So those are my comments. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Further comments from, maybe I have a couple, just based on some of my experience. But first, let me ask Eric, when we go through the process, when you're buying a home or having one built, let's take buying a home first. At At what point would someone likely see the deed? Having bought a couple myself, I can't remember when I read the deed, if it was right at closing or if I would have seen that before.
I suspect most people, it's more at closing where you're initialing all those 50 pages of
right.
things. But I think what's more important, probably most people buying houses in an urban area are going to be using a realtor, and this helps put the realtor on notice because they're doing that title search earlier on. And so they should be putting it into their MLS documentation when they're marketing the property. When we were trying to figure out a way to kind of make a mandatory disclosure without mandating on realtors or sellers, this seemed to be the best approach, is just having the deed office provide the notice. So at least it's there, and when people are starting to do that title search, it will start appearing. And so, yes, it will still probably rely on realtors to, notify their buyer that you notice there's this disclosure here, and it will show up on MLS as well. But I think you're right. Most people don't actually look at the deed or some of that.
When trying to remember, the last house I bought, I think had some kind of notice in there for asbestos, but they didn't have one for lead paint. And I think lead paint maybe came 7-8 years ago, something like that. And these are not part of the deed, as I recall. These are disclosures that result from federal law. Is that right?
Well, and lead paint or asbestos would just like radon would show up through a survey.
Yeah, inspection. Yeah.
Right, an inspection.
Yeah. Can you maybe equate that decibel line to something that the public might understand, like, let's say, traffic noise or blaring horns, train? I think when we did this about a year ago, there was a kind of a chart that we used.
Well, and it looks like I closed out the web here. So I can show you what I think it's on the back of this, basically at the appendix. Where it's trying to, well, some of these are a little bit harder. This is probably, to be honest, I don't really find these that helpful, but they're saying that a quiet office is around 40 decibels. And this is A-weighted, not C-weighted noise.
Mm-hmm.
An average office or an average conversation is 60 decibels.
And that's
Now,
not
remember that
decibels aren't linear either, so.
Right, they're not linear, and that's what this next page is trying to explain, and it's a little bit, I'm not a sound engineer, I'm not even gonna pretend to explain this. But the point is that C-weighted noise is at very low frequency, and as the gentleman pointed out, the consultant has some comments in both reports at the end saying the C-weighted noise is very hard to attenuate, and just like thunderstorms, you're going to hear it, you're going to feel it, no matter how much you do. But the point is, there's both the C-weighted frequencies, but there's also, for Riley, also has some of those higher and mid frequencies, and any sound attenuation that you do will be a help. You're not going to get rid of all of the low frequency noise, but some of the sound attenuation will help with some of the other frequency ranges. And just like airports that get shut down from noise complaints, that's the whole purpose behind this, is to try and reduce the level of complaint. And I'm not implying that Fort Riley has a lot of noise complaints, but that's the purpose behind it.
Just a couple of things from my own experience. At Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the southern boundary of the impact area on the western side is defined by Rogers Lane. On the south side of Rogers Lane, everybody was aware that just on maybe 100 feet on the north side were firing points largely used by 8-inch guns, which have a 200-pound shell. So over time, houses began to be built along the south side of Rogers Lane outside of the fence. And then we experienced cracked foundations, windows being cracked, pictures falling off the wall. And that resulted in the Army essentially abandoning those firing points or using them for something that was low impact like MLRS. And you'll never get that back. In other words, had we had a noise study, then we probably would have been far better off down there. Now, when we did the first MPRC up here at Fort Riley, and even for the impact area that you showed up there, one of the things we began working with sound engineers is, can it be attenuated? Because you've got both the boom, which is the sound of the shell exploding, and then you've got the impact, which is a little bit like what you get from an earthquake. In other words, the pressure wave is transmitted through the ground. And regardless of the berm height that we thought we could build, it didn't do any good because it's kind of like a sonic boom. It travels across the air. So that was simply abandoned. We couldn't do that. But there are things that Fort Riley has done. Number one, we instituted lighter rounds, which are training rounds for the artillery. And number two, the MLRS has practice rockets that don't have an impact characteristic. And then obviously Fort Riley has been pretty good, particularly in the past couple of years, about notifying the public, and that was one of the initiatives in this particular piece of the JLUS study. So we had the noise, we had the communications and information, we had transportation network, we had homes and things like that, all part of this JLUS. So I think this is a pretty decent package, and I think it's probably the right thing to do at this point in time, and it does two things. You know, it as good partners, it kind of tells the city what can you do, and then on the other side, it tells Fort Riley that, you know, you've got a neighbor on the other side. So I think this is all about teamwork here, and I think you guys have done a good job with it.
I just have one quick comment. The only part of this, and I'm sure you'll follow up, that gives me any hesitation or pause is just how we alert current property owners. And so even if the county was willing to send out something with property tax statements, I think that would be beneficial. I don't want people to be surprised a year or two from now that something is associated with their deed that they didn't know about. The only other thing that I would note was this last week I was in the Virginia Beach area, and the level of noise from the fighter jets and the installations that surround that area were incredibly loud, like incredibly loud. And I was at the city building, and I was asking them questions about it, and they really are just like, oh, it's kind of a common thing. We don't always know what they're doing, or we don't always get noticed. And so I just make that point to say that I think what we've been able to establish through this JLUS process is maybe a little bit unique comparatively to some of our other comparable cities that have surrounding installations. Now, Virginia Beach has a couple more that we do that they would have to coordinate with, but nonetheless, I think at least the communications patterns of it, I always get several emails, my commission email as well as my personal emails, and I always know when Fort Riley is going to do training when I should look out for those things. So I appreciate all the work that's been done on this over the last couple of years, and I think it's making a positive impact.
You got enough from us, Eric?
Yes.
Okay. Jason, anything? Anything else?
I didn't say anything, but I'm for it. It's 100%. It just recognizes the facts as they are.
Okay. All right, well, that was the only item we had on the agenda tonight, so with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you.